Today I'm joined by Boney McBonerson and this pelvis to talk about an experience I had many years ago at a doctor's office trying to get non-surgical help for my hip pain. So for background, in my 20s, I started getting really bad hip pain. I would get clicks and snaps like that. Both hips felt like I couldn't raise into hip flexion. I had trouble squatting. I had trouble even bending to touch my toes. And getting in and out of cars was painful. Sitting in the car for like 5-10 minutes was painful. Sitting to work at a computer was painful. Just felt like my hips were really raw and just felt awful all the time. And so I was told from doctors for many different sports injuries, including these injuries, that I just needed to rest. And I tried that for many years, and things just kept getting worse. In fact, the reason my hips were hurting was because I had been resting for several years, hoping and praying that my knee pain would go away, that my hand and wrist and shoulder pain would go away, and then I was developing hip pain. So in my mid and late 20s, I started doing more exercise. I started making my hips feel better, started stretching them, started strengthening them in different ways, and they started to feel better. And in my mid-30s, I started thinking, well, what would happen if I went to a doctor now in my 30s and told them I still have hip pain? What would the advice be? Is there anything non-surgical that could happen in the medical world that would help me? Because I had already helped myself quite a bit, and I had been working with clients. I'd been making videos about hip impingement and hip pain, and I thought, you know what, I want to see what the state of medicine is like. So this was probably about, I want to say about 8 years ago. Right now it's 2024, so you do the math. And I went to a doctor and I lied. I completely lied and said, hey, my hips are hurting, and I'm wondering if we could get an MRI to see, you know, what my labrum looks like and whether I have arthritis or whether, maybe I need to have a hip impingement surgery. And I just wanted to test to see what would happen. The doctor asked me, you know, what were your symptoms? And I basically told him everything I just told you, like popping, snapping, reduced range of motion, it's painful to sit, all these things. And this doctor was a non-surgical sports medicine specialist. And he actually told me right up front, my goal is to make sure you don't need to get surgery. And I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. I'm so interested to hear what this guy has to say. What kind of tips and tricks is he gonna give me, because he's a non-surgical specialist. So he did some crazy things that made me I literally had to hold my mouth because I didn't want to laugh out loud at how badly things were going. So, hey, I just want to interrupt for one quick second and ask you to hit the like button if you're liking this content. This holiday season, I'm donating 1 cent to the Wounded Warriors Project for every like and every new subscriber that we get on this channel. So on every video of mine that you watch, if you click the like button, we're going to be counting all of them, and however many we get at the end of the year, we're going to be donating 1 cent per like and per new subscriber to the Wounded Warriors Project. I want to give at least $5,000 to the Wounded Warriors Project, so please help me out, help them out, hit that like button, and now let's get back to the video. We're going. So he said, all right, let's do an exam first. And he did something that physical therapists, physical therapy students will be very familiar with. Athletic trainers, personal trainers, you might all be familiar with this. He did something called the Thomas test. And the Thomas test is to basically check your range of motion, check your hip flexors, your quads, your TFL. These are all these muscles that cross the front of the hip that can create hip flexion and also limit hip extension. And so he told me to lie down on the exam table, and it was absolutely spectacular. And put me on the table. Hopefully you can see Boney. And then he started to do the test. And before I tell you the details of the test, I want to explain why I'm telling you about all of this. The reason I'm telling you all this is because I want you to understand that just because you're talking to an alleged expert, whether it's me, whether it's a doctor, whether it's whoever who has a ton of initials behind their name, you still have to think critically to assess whether the advice you're getting, the tests that are being done, make logical sense. And I know that can be really difficult with the human body, with the the whole anatomy of the body, the movement system. If you haven't taken the time to really learn about it, it can be really confusing and daunting. But it's so important for you to realize that there's a lot of stuff that masquerades as fact, even in the medical world, and especially in the medical world. And the stakes are very high because the misunderstandings in the medical world drive you and funnel you towards more and more invasive treatments that cannot be undone. So, you are ultimately the one who has to make choices, decisions, and understand how your body works. Otherwise, you will be funneled into the most profitable treatments, even if everybody involved has your best interests in mind. Even if they're trying to think for your benefit, they're still trained within a system that funnels people into orthopedics. So this non-surgical specialist said, okay, I'm going to test your hip flexor flexibility. So Thomas test, you lie down, you have one leg up to your chest like this. It basically keeps your pelvis stable. And then you take the other leg and drop it down. And ideally, this leg down here can go down like that without the pelvis tipping into anterior pelvic tilt, all right? So you have one leg like this, block it here, and then that leg goes down, and if you have good hip flexor flexibility, the leg can go all the way down here. Even with the knee bent, you can do that. If you have any muscles that are really tight, they will stop you. So if you have some stiff hip flexor muscles, you might get to like here, and that leg is still up. You never get flat into extension. You never see that flatten out. You never see it drop below. It just gets stuck up here. Likewise, if the knee is bent, you get really jammed up. If it abducts, you know, the muscles on the outside of the lateral hip are really tight. The key part of all of this is that your leg, the side that you're testing, has to be able to drop down. And if you've ever done this test, you've ever learned this, you know, like, okay, yeah, that leg has to be able to drop down, keep that pelvis stable. Right away, the way this doctor set it up was he had me lying down, blocked my leg, then he pulled out the little extension on the table so that my foot hit the extension of the table. So I actually couldn't extend because I was hitting that extension. So he could never even test my hip extension. So he just had me blocked, and he's like, boom, boom, hitting into the table, never reaching full hip extension. And he was like, okay, that's good. Switch to the other side, bang into the extension of the table, not really testing my hip extension. I literally was blinking super hard, like, what is this the actual test? Is he really doing this as the test? Bang, 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 okay, yeah, that's good. And then kind of like moving it up this way, if it pinches, you know, did it hurt? And I was laughing inside going, wow, what is he doing? Is he seriously is he doing this? And then he'd do like a little bit of a, you know, hamstring test. He did a couple other ones. I can't remember because I was so shocked at his Thomas test. So after all these tests, you know, he asked me about my physical activities and what I like to do. And I told him, like, you know, I like to, you know, do some dancing and some martial arts, and I want to be able to play hockey, all these things. I don't want to play hockey. Well, I kind of play hockey now, but not as a goalie anymore. But because it's too frustrating, not because of pain, but it's too frustrating. It takes too much time. It's really stinky. Hockey equipment is really disgusting. But I recently started playing roller hockey again, skating out. It is fun, but I like to keep it casual, pickups easy, you know? So anyway, I'm digressing. The doctor, here's what I'm into, and he says, well, you know, based on everything you've told me, and based on, you know, the exam where you have a little bit of, you know, a little bit of tightness, like that slight pinching when you go into Fader and Faber. So just so you understand those, Fader, they take, oh, good Lord, that's not supposed to happen. I'm sorry, Boney. So anyway, you take the knee, you bring it towards the midline, and then you kind of get some internal rotation. You're trying to basically bring it across and then get internal rotation. And if that pinches or hurts or doesn't feel comfortable, they say, well, you probably have something terribly wrong in your hip joint. Perhaps your hip has totally come apart. They say maybe you have hip impingement, labral tears, whatever What they don't tell you though, I'll save that right after I explain fader. Fader is basically, well, they kind of have you do this and then push that knee out, and then if it hurts, they say, well, yeah, you have some hip problems. Potentially, you might have hip impingement, you might have labral tears, whatever. And if you have any of those, then they say you need to get probably surgery or take 6 months of conservative care, which means doing nothing and trying to baby it. And then when that doesn't work, because it won't, then we'll send you to the surgeon to fix this problem. So what they don't tell you is that these two major hip tests, these hip impingement tests, don't actually correlate to anything. So there's been pretty good research on the sensitivity and specificity of these tests, and these tests don't turn out very well. Like when you actually test the tests to see whether they tell you anything about the state of your hip joint, these tests fail miserably, like miserably. So you can't really trust them. I will link to some resources in the description box so you can fact check me. I've done videos on Fader and Faber. I went through all the research. These tests are literal BS, but they seem really scientific, so they do them. And even though the science says they're useless, doctors will do them, even the non-surgical ones. Okay, so based on these tests, based on the discomfort you have, you probably, Matt, you probably have hip arthritis already. You probably have a labral tear. And so what I would recommend is that you stop doing all those activities. So that means you really shouldn't be loading into your hips too much, like no more dancing, no more martial arts of any kind, no more hockey, no more loading. So he actually said no more weightlifting because that's loading your hips and that will make your hips deteriorate faster, allegedly. He didn't mention, and I will mention it to you here, that loading muscles and bones with weight is actually how you maintain the muscles and maintain the bones. The less you load your bones, the less dense your bones become because they are reacting to the demands that you're placing on them. So if you've ever watched the movie, the Disney movie Wall-E, they show a lot of humans riding around in hover chairs on the spaceship Axiom, the cruise ship Axiom, and all of their bones have basically disintegrated. They've all become muscleless, very large, obese, and unable to locomote humans who need those hover chairs because they have allowed their bodies to waste away. So long and the short of it is if you don't load your bones, they will disintegrate. That is literally what happens. So the advice of don't load your bones because otherwise you'll break your hips should be very suspicious to you. So basically he said, don't do all those things. And I said, well, doctor, could we get an MRI? Because I was just curious. I really wanted to know. And he was like, well, you know, I don't think it would really change much, right? Which was actually smart, right? Because he's non-surgical. He's trying not to let me get mentally down this rabbit hole of like, well, the MRI says, therefore I need the surgery. Because that's how it works with back pain and hip pain. Even now with back pain, a lot of medical guidelines actually say don't MRI and don't x-ray people's backs just because they have back pain, because you will find a lot of pathologies, a lot of things that are supposedly bad in those x-rays and MRIs that don't correlate at all to their back pain. So when you x-ray or MRI somebody's back when they have back pain and you find all these alleged abnormalities, people start to catastrophize and they go, oh no, my back is totally messed up. I really do need surgery. When in fact, if they had never seen that image, they would not be panicking about their back pain, and then the back pain would probably resolve. It would either resolve on its own, or they would learn how to take care of their bodies better, and they would start to learn how to stretch and exercise so that they regain hip and spine mobility and probably also stretch out their shoulders. In any case, with the hips, they haven't yet started making those recommendations because we're only, a couple decades into this crazy fad with hip impingement surgery. So people are still busy making money on that, and there has not been that much research on it yet, especially none to compare it to placebo. Even though hip impingement surgery has been shown in multiple studies to disappoint more than half of the patients who get it, we're still not at the point where they're saying this is maybe not such a good idea. So anyway, this doctor said, hey, getting an MRI is not really going to change much of the recommendation for you because, in your 30s, you already have signs of arthritis. You just need to take it easy from now on. And I pushed back because I knew that if I did, I would probably get the MRI. So I said, hey, I'd just like to know. I just like the information, which, this is something that many people have told me in the past. They're like, oh, I want to get the MRI because I want the information. Again, going back to the whole back pain thing, if you have information that is not actually useful, it's just noise. So I often try to tell people like, hey, if it's me, I'm not gonna get those images because those images, like we've already seen with back pain, shoulder pain, they just scare you into doing something with a very poor success rate or very questionable anyway. And if I don't want a surgery, I really shouldn't start doing the things that will just logically lead that way. Anyway, in this case, I was pushing to be that person. So I said, hey, I want the information. And so he did the MRI. He ordered the MRI, went and lay down in the MRI tube tunnel thingy. And I remember lying on this hard little plastic plank thing and just thinking like, man, lying here for 45 minutes on this hard plastic plank thing, I can think of a lot of clients that I've had over the years for whom this would be a really big aggravation of their hip pain and back pain. And I was just lying there, meditating on this, thinking like, man, this is crazy. Like if I had done this when I was in my 20s, this just lying in this tube would have been really uncomfortable and painful for my hips. I don't know if I actually could have just kept still with this humming and then like being on a hard surface with a butt that had no muscle. It just would have been terrible. So did the MRI. I had my follow-up appointment with the doctor, expecting to hear the worst because like I told you earlier, my hips in my 20s were really bad. Like lifting was impossible. Like just getting here was impossible. It would just snap. I'd get snapping and popping in so many different ranges of motion. Going out to the side and around like this was really tough because it would be like clack, 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 clack. And it would just be so uncomfortable. Sitting down was horrible. Like all of these things were just not doable. Like lift, clack, clack, clack. It would have just been terrible. So I was actually convinced that since I had all of the symptoms of what's now called hip impingement syndrome, that in the MRI, they would show me the bone shapes and say like, hey, you got the bone shapes, right? Because the way this whole hip impingement syndrome thing is explained is the bones are what cause the range of motion problem. And the range of motion problems display themselves in a specific way. You will lose hip flexion, you'll get pinching and jamming and fader and Faber, you'll get all these things, right? The thing is, they don't have a alternative explanation for how you would get all those same symptoms besides the bone shapes, right? So I would be an example of somebody who had all of the symptoms, like just so much pain and discomfort in the hips, unable to do any of these hip impingement tests comfortably, very limited range of motion, popping and snapping and clicking and crunching back in my 20s, but a lot of that had already gone away by the time I was in my 30s. So I was thinking, okay, let's check these bone shapes. Let's see what happens. He told me at the first appointment that he was expecting that I had a labral tear already based on everything that we had done. So when he'd done all the tests, because there was discomfort in those tests, he said, like, you probably have a labral tear, right? Remember how I said these tests are useless? These tests supposedly say, yeah, you got a labral tear. Okay. So he did the MRI. He's like, well, you don't have a labral tear, or we didn't pick it up in the MRI. It's possible the MRI missed it. Okay. That's, I guess, a possibility. The bones themselves look okay within normal range. which surprised me a lot. And then he said, there are signs of degenerative changes, there are signs of arthritis in your hip. So I would just reiterate basically everything he told me, right? I would reiterate that you should just be keeping still, not loading your hips, not dancing, not lifting weights, not doing anything, because it'll just make your arthritis worse. And so I want to return again to this whole idea of why you need to hear this. This non-surgical specialist is giving me advice to avoid surgery by doing something that will make me weaker. There's literally no way I can get stronger if I stop loading muscles. There's no way I can improve range of motion if I stop exercising. There's no way I can maintain bone density if I just rest for the rest of my life. There's literally no way. I could maybe take bone density drugs, which may cause my liver to fail or whatever other crazy side effects they have, but literally nothing I can do, right? So the advice the non-surgical specialist is giving me is, you are now helpless, so don't do anything at all. The logical conclusion of that advice is my hip muscles will be weaker and weaker over time. I will lose more and more range of motion. I will get more uncomfortable because as muscles atrophy, they ache. Remember that atrophy aches. And then I will be in more hip pain. And then I will complain more to another doctor. And I will complain and complain and complain until what? They're going to give me injections. So we're already doing rest, then they're going to give me injections. Maybe they'll tell me to ice it. Then they're going to give me pills. And eventually I'm going to get surgery for my hip pain, because I was not doing anything proactive to try to fix my own hips at the advice of the non-surgical specialist. So while he was telling me this kind of stuff, he was just telling me like, yeah, it's not a good idea for you to do anything with your hips anymore. You really should take it easy because your hips are already arthritic in your 30s, and it's not really a good sign. I was literally just taking deep breaths, trying to maintain eye contact, and I was like, thank you so much for your advice, doctor. Yeah, I appreciate it. And after that, I continued to lift weights, continued to learn how to stretch properly, continued to work on loading my hips. After a couple of years after that appointment, I got to the point where I did quit hockey because it was so stressful to be a goalie, commuting back and forth, like to commute to the ice rink and get dressed, all that's like the 1 hour game turns into a 3.5, 4 hour affair. And then you have grown men who are still fantasizing about making the NHL, spearing you when you're covering the puck and all this stuff. So I just stopped. And then I took up surfing, which, as you can imagine, is not necessarily the easiest thing on your hips. You are sitting a lot, which I have discovered is not great for maintaining hip muscle balance, but it can be dealt with. And yeah, so my hip mobility is still it's actually getting better than what it was in my 20s. And I'm in my 40s now. It's better than what it was in my 30s. And I've even come across, especially in the last year, like really, really difficult areas of stiffness and tightness from surfing so much that really felt like, man, what is going on? Like my back is clunking, my hip is clunking, and I feel really stiff and tight. But all of that has taught me that I need to actually learn how to recover properly. I need to learn how to stretch properly. It may be different from what I was doing before. When I was a goalie, the things I had to do to maintain my hips were a little bit different than what I feel I need to do to help me continue to surf. Because when I surf, I get, muscles all around the glutes here can get super, super tight. And then the hip flexors get super, super tight. And then I get all out of whack when I go to sit down. I try to get up. These muscles are not talking and not coordinating properly. But I can tell you for sure that in my 20s, also in my 30s, getting down into a squat like this was a real, real difficult challenge. And it felt raw. It felt like bones were really uncomfortable, like things were grinding. And also, as the muscles started to come back, as I started to stretch things, as I started to develop a better sense of how to train those muscles, that sense of naked bone on bone, it went away. That's not to say that for every human being out there that that's going to be the outcome. But it is to say that you can at least shoot for that. And there's no cost to you, right? There's no downside to trying to fix your own hips, even when other well-intentioned voices tell you it's impossible. Because if you just take that advice and you go, okay, yeah, well, I guess I'm done, then you're on the fast path to a surgery. And if you don't, and if you do what many other people have done, which is to start exercising more consciously, using your brain to really think about how you can gradually and safely challenge new ranges of motion, you can actually expand your range of motion and increase your levels of comfort and avoid potentially, and most probably avoid a surgery that doesn't have great satisfaction rates. Now, I've done some videos already about the satisfaction rates on things like hip impingement surgery. They're not good. You know, the majority of patients are dissatisfied with the results of the surgery. So even if you go down this path of trying to fix your own hips, even if you fail, maybe you manage to just throw yourself at different stretches and exercises mindlessly and you hurt yourself just over and over and over again because you keep thinking no pain, no gain, and you just keep hurting yourself, what's going to be the downside? You did delay the surgery, but if you go back, you still have the surgery as an option. It's not like you permanently destroy, damage, whatever. There's not going to be something so much worse because you did exercise. Even though surgeons will often say that, even though they've set up their research studies and biased all of their patients and told them like, hey, there's nothing you can do, stop moving, you can't get better without the surgery, even though they set up their surgical studies to be highly biased against exercise, even though they set it up so that the exercises they do recommend to the patients are literally worse than useless, you can still find exercises that work for you, right? So that's what I want to get across. It's not going to be about doing boot camp style workouts. It's not about trying to hit your muscles super hard, super heavy, super fast. It's about learning to stretch things properly, learning to get some separation of your pelvis and your femur, learning how to say, okay, I just want to move this here without any compensation. I just want to move this here without any compensation. I want to be able to move out to the side. I want to be able to do this without compensation, without my back dumping, without some other muscles pulling me in funny ways. That's a process and it's different for every person, and it does require a lot of time. It requires patience. It requires mindfulness. It's not always easy. It's frankly rarely easy, but it is worth it. And when others are hitting you with the physically feeble fallacy, which is what that doctor was hitting me with, you have to be on guard. Because when everybody is telling you, oh, there's no way, stop trying, that doesn't actually mean that that's the truth. You've probably noticed that in many parts of your life. If you've accomplished anything, you may have noticed that those who are most convinced you can't do something are the ones who have basically the least context to go on. They're so convinced that you can't do something because they've never tried, and for them, they're like, why would you want to try? And when you tried, you accomplished it. Again, I wanted to share this experience because I think it's important for you to understand that the medical world, even when people are full of good intentions, they don't always have good information. They aren't reading all the studies. They aren't as invested as you are in fixing your own body. And this applies across the board. Whether it's shoulder pain, back pain, knee pain, foot pain, whatever, there's a reason why you're seeing this huge upsurge and people and trainers on health and fitness, people on YouTube talking about how they're fixing their own bodies without the drastic invasive measures. It's because it's possible. And you can do it if you take the time. I have free videos all over YouTube for hip pain, and shoulder pain, and back pain. I encourage you to check them out. I'll link to some in the description box down below. If you are looking for a program that's guided, that has a schedule, that breaks things down for you, that can help you just step by step follow through on what you need to do every week, I encourage you to go to uprighthealth.com/DIY. I have programs that will help you rebuild your body at home, and they are all money back guaranteed, because I know that a program that I make on the computer for you to use on your phone or computer, it's not going to work for 100% of people. That's the honest truth. Some people can't learn that way. It's just not going to work. Some people, the program just might not fit them exactly the way it needs to fit them, and that's okay. I get it. I understand. That's why they're money back guaranteed. So you try them for 60 days, and if they don't feel like they're helping you, then just let my team know. We send you a refund, and you're good. You find something that works for you. The goal there is to help people that I can help without any risk to you. So that if this $150 fixes your issues, you are so ahead of the game. You didn't have to pay all these co-pays, you didn't have to go to the chiropractor, you didn't have to go to the whatever for months and months and months. Like, if you compare that to a surgery or to a 3-month commitment at some whatever, we'll just say alternative health person that costs you $2,000, we're talking about a very reasonable deal. I'm not here to get crazy wealthy. My ultimate goal is to make sure that people understand that they can help themselves so much more than we're often trained to believe. So you can help yourself, you can rebuild your body. Take the time to do it. You can go to uprighthealth.com/DIY, check out all the programs. I even have a program to help you called the Body Rebuilding Basics that'll be linked on there, where you can learn all the many ways to rebuild your mind and then your body. It's got free workouts and all that. So I encourage you to check that out as well. And before you go, right now, it's November. It's getting towards the end of 2024. I want to ask you to hit the like button, because from now to the end of 2024, I'm going to donate 1 cent to the Wounded Warriors Project. So for every like that my channel gets, every single like on every single video that I get, we're going to look at the analytics, we're going to count them up. Every single one is going to be 1 cent donated to the Wounded Warriors Project. So please click that like button. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, hit the subscribe button, because every new subscriber that we get, we're going to also donate 1 cent to the Wounded Warriors Project. So click the like button, make sure it stays clicked, right? Don't unclick it, just click it once. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will donate money to the Wounded Warriors Project. I'm trying to donate more than $5,000. So please make sure you hit it, and then share this video with somebody else who needs to hear this message. Make sure they click the like button and that they subscribe so that we can raise money for a good cause this holiday season. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you watching. Check out some more free videos to help you right here. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.